Good morning on a snowy March morning in Ann Arbor. Welcome to today's lecture. This is series, I think, number 9, perhaps out of about 20 in the U of M series on healthy aging, the art and science of successful aging. It'll extend from January when it began through latter part of May. The series is arranged by various U of M entities. Let me list those quickly. The Michigan Medicine Department of Geriatrics, the Turner Senior Wellness Program, OLLI, the Lifelong Learning Institute at U of M, the Silver Club Memory Programs, the Turner African American Services Council, the Institute of Healthcare Policy and Innovation, and the National Poll on Aging. Thanks to all the volunteers there that helped make this program possible through these many months. My name is Leo Shedden. I'll be your moderator for today's lecture. With the help of Zoom, we know we have viewers from both Ann Arbor and beyond. Welcome to you all. If you have Zoom access issues, try logging off and re-entering with the link that you were provided in your invitation to this event. Note that we're using the webinar format. You cannot be seen or heard, but you can submit questions via the Q&A link on your screen. You can submit questions even now or anytime through the lectures, and I will collect those for our Q&A session to follow. Let's take a quick look at upcoming events. 2 events in the OLLI world, that's the Lifelong Learning Institute on Wednesday, next Wednesday, from 3 to 4:30, entitled Detroit in Flux, Architecture and Urbanism in the Motor City. On Thursday, next week, Thursday the 17th at 10 a.m., Music in Detroit, Modern Opera. And then next Friday, the 18th, again in the series we're here for today, the Healthy Aging series continues with Readiness for an Emergency, What Seniors Need to Know. Excellent topics throughout the series. Now for today's lecture, the title of which takes the form of 2 questions, and we have experts here to address each of those 2 questions. The first, what should be in my legal first aid kit when planning for uncertain times? To tackle that question, we have Terrence Bertram, is the owner of Legacy Law Center in Ann Arbor. Terry has been providing estate and elder law planning services for families in the greater Washtenaw County area and beyond for well over 30 years. His experience with the financial, personal, and legal impact that occurs at the time of incapacity and death has helped thousands of individuals and families create solid estate planning, which in turn has resulted in millions of dollars in life savings, nursing home poverty avoided, legacies protected, and many, many grateful families. Terry, welcome to the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you for having me today, and thank you, Leo. I am going to share a screen here and to help me pace my presentation going forward. Let's see if we can't do this for you here. There. Hopefully everybody can see that. And I'm going to.
Terry, if you can swap the view, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. That's what I needed to know. There we go.
Perfect.
So I'm an attorney, and oftentimes what we hear folks talking about are 2 different extremes that are both important, and I don't want to diminish that. On one hand, retirement planning on what kind of resources do you have available and you'll need to meet your retirement lifestyle goals. And then at the other hand, estate planning, what kind of things should I have in place, wills or trust, for who gets my stuff when I'm gone. But in the middle of that, there's something that we often fail to plan for is, as I had one client who came to me when we were meeting and talking about stuff, says, what happens if I don't die, but I become incapacitated? And that's where the elder law planning comes into effect also, that we want to plan for the uncertain times when we may not be where we just one day pass away, but that we become incapacitated, to make sure that we have options to handle our affairs at that time there. And so what we suggest that people look at when they're talking to attorneys or others, that they deal with not only what's important in terms of estate planning, wills, trust, and what happens after death in terms of administering an estate, but how about how if I need long-term care, what about the resources that are available to me, and how do I best qualify for that? And what resources are available in the community to link me up? And of course, those of us who are in the greater Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County community know, the good news is there's a lot of resources. The bad news is there's a lot of resources, and it can be confusing to know which ones are right for me and how can I best access those, what are the costs associated with it, and what's the decision making that goes along with that there. Because one of the things that we do know is if we need long-term care, the cost can be expensive, not just in out-of-pocket costs, such as nowadays in the area, nursing home costs can be greater than $9,000 a month. If you need assisted living, which is a level before nursing home, it can be in the range of $4,500 to $7,500 a month. And of course, then in-home care, where we have some help coming in, depending on how many hours a day and the level of care, anywhere from $25 to $75. But it's also not just the financial costs, it's the other costs of our family and caregivers that they might have to provide to assist us. And it's been suggested that the unpaid costs, that uncompensated care annually, exceeds $196 billion a year by what caregivers give. And oftentimes those are our adult children and others, and that they have to leave the workforce or aren't able to fully participate because they're helping their loved ones and what have you. And so there is a cost to long-term care there. And talking to people, what are folks' concerns as we age and as our abilities may change? People talk about wanting to make sure they have access to quality health care, live as independently as possible, what we refer to as aging in place, maintain our mobility and control of decision making, and address the fear of going broke from expensive long-term care costs. And if we have loved ones at home, making sure we don't send them into poverty while we're needing extra care for ourselves, as well as hopefully leaving a legacy to others. And finally, wanting that to know that those that we are taking care of, that we're not getting more than we want, avoiding the fear of unwanted life support, and then making sure what we have left when we're gone goes to whom we want, when we want, how we want, and hopefully at the least cost there. Now, what are some of the challenges that we face in doing that? Well, one of the things is, how do we manage our assets? And one of the places that I like to start with talking with folks is, how do you have things titled? Because that can be a problem with your assets. Oftentimes, people will say, well, I've already taken care of, I'll avoid any problems because I have somebody else on my accounts. And that, well, if that somebody else is a spouse, that's okay. There's no problem with that. But what if your spouse is unable to help you, if that's a situation, because of their own incapacity, or what happens upon the first death and there's a surviving spouse, it's now in your name only. And so the next thing that people will say, well, I've put one of my adult children on there, or some other person I trust, and they are on jointly with me. I am a strong believer that that's a bad way of doing any planning. And one of my suggested takeaways from today's workshop is, if you have anyone else on any of your accounts that's not a spouse, you want to remove them. Now, why do I tell you that? One is the reason it works is they have full access to those same assets that you do. That means they are considered a co-owner. So any problems that they may have in their life, a divorce, and I know while there's a 50% divorce rate, none of our children would ever get divorced, so we maybe don't have to worry about that. But any of their creditor problems can become your creditor problem. And, the other thing is, unfortunately, according to the Attorney General's office, most of the theft that occurs within elder folks' estates are caused by their own family. So you want to make sure you have someone you trust. But also the final issue is, if you've added the children, you have also added typically the IRS as an additional beneficiary to your estate that you don't need to. Now, why do I say that? So I had a gentleman who said, well, I've taken care of the problem. I've put one of my children on my home with me. So upon my death, it automatically goes to them. Well, when he purchased that home, and these aren't the exact numbers, but just for example here, he purchased it for $75,000. Upon his death, it was worth $125,000. So there was $50,000 of gain. By putting his child on there, his child had to pay capital gains tax on that increase of value. Whereas if that child would have received it at death, they get what's called a step up in basis, and there's no capital gains tax. So it's creating a capital gain issue of any increase in value because you put someone on during life. It's considered a gift. Furthermore, we tax gifts beyond a certain threshold. Now you can give anybody a gift annually up to a maximum of $15,000. If it's above that, it's subject to gift tax. So that one transaction of putting someone else on the house can be subject to gift taxes as well as capital gains tax. So some people will say, does it make a difference if I get 100,000 during life or I get 100,000 at death? And I say, absolutely. I would always take the 100,000 at death instead of during life, because I know I'll get it off. Whereas during life, some of that is going to have to go to the IRS, and I didn't have to. The IRS doesn't require it unless you do planning that way. And then the final issue is long-term care planning. If you put anyone else on an account and you then need long-term care assistance from either the Medicaid system or the Veterans Administration system, it can be viewed as a divestment where you have given an asset to somebody else, and there are penalties for divestments. And we don't want any unintended forced errors to disqualify you from long-term care should that become necessary there. So from that standpoint, we want to avoid as much as we can to put roadblocks into should bad things happen and you need long-term care assistance down the road. Now, you say, okay, Terry, I don't have anyone on my accounts. I've now become incapacitated. What happens? Well, unfortunately, if we have nobody on our accounts, as we shouldn't, but we haven't created any tools for people to help us, and something bad happens, we have to go to the probate court, what we refer to as a living probate. And truly, this is an awful thing that none of us want. And that's where we have to have a guardianship or a conservatorship or both appointed for us to handle our affairs for us. A guardianship is called of the person. So if I'm unable to make healthcare decisions for myself or make determinations of where I live, things of that sort, that's a guardianship. If I need to hand someone to handle my financial matters because I can't handle them, that's a conservatorship. Now, some people may think that, well, I'm married, or my next of kin is an adult child, and they can automatically step into my shoes and handle any of my affairs if I can't, as my next of kin or as my spouse. That's not the case. In Michigan, as well as any other state, because of our familiar relationships, because we're married or we have others next of kin, they have no authority to make any financial decisions for you or medical decisions for you if you can't. And as a result of that, regardless of marital status or other things, if you don't have anything and you're unable to make decisions, we're often having to get a guardianship or conservatorship or both. Now, what is it? It's where the court is, and as our judge likes to remind us here, it's the only proceeding other than criminal law where we are removing the civil rights of an incapacitated individual and giving it to somebody else. And therefore, the threshold for that to occur is very high, what we call clear and convincing evidence. And secondly, the court is going to monitor what's going on as long as that guardianship or conservatorship is needed. So it's often humiliating for the person who needs the assistance. The court is in control. It takes a while because the judge isn't just going to, on your word, grant that. It's only after hearings and professionals give clear evidence as to your incapacity. And it's expensive because it's ongoing there in that regard. So the nightmare of a living probate is something we want to avoid as much as we can if possible. So what are our options then if that's the case? Well, the first piece of that first aid kit that we suggest everyone needs, regardless of how many assets they have or what their financial situation is a comprehensive financial or property power of attorney. Now, you'll see different names out there: financial power of attorney, property power of attorney, durable power of attorney. And those are all talking about somebody to manage our financial affairs if we can't. Now, I happen to like one that has immediate effect as opposed to one that is what's called springing, only goes into effect upon my disability. And you say, well, aren't you concerned, Terry, that if you have one with immediate effect, that somebody, while you didn't mean for them to do something today, could take advantage of you? And my response often is, so I should be more concerned when I could monitor what someone's doing versus later on when I can't because I am incapacitated and I can't monitor what they're doing. So I like it to be immediate because then I have a helper where I don't necessarily have to give up control. So a perfect example, frankly, was my mother. My mother had her lower extremities. She couldn't use them. She was bedridden, but she wanted me to help. Now, she was not incompetent. If you had asked her to give up control of her financial affairs, she would have told me to take a hike as well as others there. But she wanted me to be a helper. And with a power of attorney with immediate effect, just by my possessing that, I could do some banking for her and help her with other financial matters without her giving up control. So that's one of the values of it being immediate. The second thing that we wanted to do is be comprehensive. And by comprehensive, not just someone who can pay the bills, if you will, but that it also offers other kinds of tools within that, such as the ability to pull money possibly away from me and give it to my spouse or put it into an irrevocable trust, a trust that is created so that I can qualify for long-term care assistance from Medicaid or VA sooner without bleeding down all the assets that would leave more for my spouse or loved ones. And part of that is allowing for gifting there. And so we want it to be a power of attorney that has a lot of different abilities within it so that someone can get creative to manage things in your best interest, but to do beyond bill paying, if you will. The other thing is if you happen to be a Michigan resident, we want to make sure that your power of attorney was done subsequent to October 1 of 2012. And I say that because the legislature for the first time passed legislation regarding powers of attorneys, and that became effective on October 1 of 2012. And while they didn't say prior powers of attorneys were not honored anymore and had to be redone, the reality out in the marketplace, if you will, in terms of financial institutions, title companies, government agencies, if it's older than 2012, oftentimes they're reluctant to honor it. And we want to know that we have a tool in place that will work when it must work there, and that it's not something that doesn't get honored by third parties. And so we strongly suggest that if you have one that was done prior to that, that it be updated there. Along with financial decision making, we want to make sure we have a healthcare power of attorney. Absolutely essential. A healthcare power of attorney so somebody has the legal authority to make medical decisions for us if we can't make them for ourselves. And what is critical with this is not only that we have it, but that also in Michigan, we don't have a statute that has a separate, what's called a living will. What do I want or don't want at end of life? Rather, that's incorporated within our healthcare power of attorney. We want to make sure we express what we want or don't want regarding life-sustaining treatment, what is important to us, a good life or a long life as we age, and is comfort care something that's important to us, or do we want treatment in all cases to the very end, and different issues regarding that. Often we give more babysitting instructions than what we want or don't want as we age. And the last time I looked, the statistic hadn't changed. It's still 100% guaranteed that we're all going to pass away at some point. And therefore, it is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we leave clear instructions for our loved ones as to what's important to us at that time. Now, I refer to this as a healthcare power of attorney. There are different names out there. It's called an advance directive, a patient advocate form, a healthcare proxy. This is the document that if you are being treated at a hospital, either as an inpatient or an outpatient, by federal law, they will ask if you have this and make it available. You can make it available and they will put it into your record. And it's a critical document because, like the financial power of attorney, no one has automatic authority to make these decisions for you. And furthermore, if there isn't clear and convincing evidence on what you want, then often the healthcare facility is unable to do what you might want if there's not a clear expression of that. I know that I've been involved in several situations where family members said, you know, mom would not want to be kept alive in this circumstance and what have you. But because mom didn't have a document that expressed what she wanted for end of life, the healthcare facility was required to do everything necessary to keep her alive as long as possible, and including cardiac resuscitation and other interventions and treatment, even if that likelihood of that helping was next to nothing there. They're required by law to do everything that they can to keep someone alive instead of providing them the comfort care and allowing them to gently pass if that's the outcome that is likely in that circumstance. Yeah. A companion document that we want to make sure that we all have that goes along with these other documents is there's a federal healthcare privacy law called HIPAA. And we want to make sure that we have a HIPAA compliant general medical release so that those who you trust, you want to be able to talk to your healthcare providers. If you're in the hospital, call the nurses station. They're not necessarily the decision maker, although that would be one of them that you want on this HIPAA authorization, but it'd be those people you want to be able to pierce your privacy from the standpoint of being able to talk to your attending physician or other healthcare providers and to be able to know information that would help them provide better support to you. So it's a critical standalone document. Sometimes we will see a HIPAA only contained within that healthcare power, but the healthcare power of attorney only goes into effect if you can't make decisions on your own. And so if you can, it's not in effect, and therefore the HIPAA authorization is not in effect. And that's why we want it as a separate document. So regardless of whether or not you're incapacitated or not, those who you trust and that you want to be able to get information from your healthcare providers, or even that you can be a companion with someone when they go to a doctor's office or others, and being able to ask questions and be in the room when they're meeting with the treating physician or what have you. So a HIPAA authorization is a critical document to have along with the healthcare power of attorney and the financial power of attorney. It's quite possible some 50+% of us will enter the long-term care maze. And that's when our needs can't be handled just by ourselves in our home without any assistance there. And quickly that maze can overwhelm us with financial, legal, and health issues. And while we may have supports, it can overwhelm the caregiver as well there. And so we want to figure out that how do you get the best quality care no matter where you are living, whatever your supports are, and to maintain a good quality of life. And make sure you access everything that is available to you at that time in terms of coverage, benefits, supports, and that the tools are there if you need assistance as you go forward. And how do we protect the maximum of your resources so that, as I said, your other loved ones don't go broke because all of the resources are being consumed by you as you become incapacitated there. And in simplest terms, what we want to be concerned about, how does someone with a chronic illness find, get, and pay for long-term care? And one of the misnomers is people say, well, I've got Medicare and Medicare pays for my long-term care. And I want to assure you that Medicare does not pay for long-term care. Medicare covers for acute care needs. So Medicare will pay for me if I need a triple bypass operation and I'm in the Medicare system. But if I have dementia and can't live on my own, if I've had a stroke, or I can't do some of the activities of daily living, whether it's bathing, feeding, toileting, dressing, and things of that sort. Medicare does not pay for that. And what Medicare will do is if something has happened to me acutely, I've fallen and broken my hip, and I go into a hospital and I'm treated in that hospital for at least 3 consecutive midnights. After that, then Medicare will pay for up to 20 days in a long-term care facility. Days 21 to 100, they may provide additional services if it's medically required, but it's got to be medically required there. And in no cases do they go beyond 100 days there. So once Medicare leaves off, you have to use your own assets or qualify for either the Veterans Administration or Medicaid, depending on your circumstances there. Now, I said at the beginning here with Medicare, to get those benefits, you have to make sure you have 3 midnight stays in a hospital first. The other thing is you want to make sure that you have been admitted to the hospital. If you are in a hospital on observation status, that does not qualify you for any long-term care assistance once discharged from the hospital. So we always tell people, pay attention to if you're going into a hospital, that they admit you versus observation, and hopefully it's the 3 midnights so that you can qualify for at least the 20 up to 100 days there beyond that for long-term care. And like I say, after that, you have to use your own assets. Now, this is what we want to look at. So the top line here talks about what's going on with you. How are you functioning? Do you have no limits, or as we age, or we have some limitations there, or more limitations, or significant limitations there? And then along with that, what is our living situation? Are we living at home or with assistance or in some type of supported living or retirement community assisted living or a skilled nursing facility? Now, one of the problems we will often see is we'll see somebody who maybe has more limited function, but they're living at home without any assistance. And when that occurs, what often happens is something catastrophic will occur, and they will boomerang from living at home all the way to the skilled nursing. Whereas if we provided assistance while living at home, where maybe bringing in home health care, that they will be able to thrive in place and less likely that boomerang going into a skilled nursing facility. But often we run into individuals and families saying, yes, but I recognize that will cost more, and I'm trying to save what I have for in case I need a skilled nursing facility, a nursing home. And what I try to help people see is if we spend the money now, we're less likely to have to spend it later on. And so spend the money that you have now to get the home with assistance, if that's the situation, or look at some supported living short of a nursing home where you can get the supports. And yes, it does cost money. And in addition to your assets or income, we can look at different things as far as VA benefits, community services, family caregivers, and then the Medicaid system there as to other resources. So what we're trying to do with this elder care continuum, look at where someone's functioning, where are they living, what's the cost, and what resources can we marshal to help make sure that people are thriving in place in the least restrictive environment, if you will. Because oftentimes when things happen, it's chaos. There's unknown. What's going to happen? How am I going to proceed here? And we have a lot of confusion as to what's going to occur. Whereas if you put a team together, your financial planner, your accountant, your lawyer, and your different resources, you can make sure you have the tools to protect your assets as best as possible, that you know what you've got and are spending it accordingly, that you resolve care issues, that you're getting any government benefits you're entitled to, and you have peace of mind that you're making the best out of a bad situation there. Because our goal here is to make sure we age with dignity and access the best care possible. We control over who will manage our finances and our health care if we can't. And if possible, leave a legacy there. And so we want to make sure we have these different first aid kit things in place, the financial power of attorney, the healthcare power, and the HIPAA authorization and long-term care plan. Now, you know, I didn't talk about the other tools that there are available as far as wills and trust. That's part of finishing up your plan. But today I wanted to focus on the first aid kit, if you will, that make sure that during our life that we're protected. And as you know, whenever we get on an airplane, when they do the demonstration at the front end, the flight attendants, they say when the oxygen mask comes out down, put the one on yourself first before you put it on others, because they know and we know that you first got to take care of yourself and then you can provide for others. And the best way that you can take care of yourself from the perspective of as we age is to make sure we have the right tools that others can help us should the need arise there. And that's what we want to do there. And then we can add other tools to that that will help us as we go along. And so at this point, I'm going to conclude my presentation and allow you to hear from the gifted Jerry, who can talk to you from a dollars and cents standpoint here. And should you need to get a hold of or desire to get a hold of me, my email, telephone number, and our website is on the screen here. And I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you this morning.
Jerry, thank you so much. Very informative. Before we introduce our second speaker, as you point out, I'd encourage our audience, we have some questions submitted now. Feel free to submit questions as we go along, and we'll have a Q&A, a combined Q&A session before we end today's event. Okay, so the second part of our lecture today, again, centered on a question: who will pay your income during retirement after the paychecks stop? A question perhaps that has occurred to all of us at some point or another. Jerry Mangona has 20 years of experience with Edward Jones. He grew up in the city of Detroit and graduated from UD Jesuit High School prior to attending U of M, and then leading on to a career as a financial advisor. Aside from his professional life, he is a semi-professional piano player, a multi-talented speaker for sure. When he's not at the office or behind the keys, he is a member of the Detroit Yacht Club, where he enjoys kayaking, stand-up paddleboarding, and serves as a sailing instructor. Excellent background. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us, and help us now with a financial perspective of today's topic.
Of course. Thank you, Leo. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed.
Wonderful. That was a wonderful presentation from Terry Bertram, and I look forward to continuing that discussion when we get to the Q&A. I have been a financial advisor, as Leo mentioned, for 20 years here in Ann Arbor. I'm over at the Edward Jones Investments office on Carpenter Road on Ann Arbor's east side. Feel free to reach out to us if we can be of assistance. We host an open office hours over coffee and donuts once a month if you'd like to join us. And as well, I'm a regular lecturer at the Pittsfield Township Senior Center over on Ellsworth Road. Reach out to them to look at their calendar of events. We'd love to see you there as well. Let me share my screen here. Okay, Leo, can you confirm that that is coming up all right?
Yes, indeed. It's very visible.
Wonderful, thank you. So each of us has a different retirement goal or a definition of what our retirement might look like. But we all have one goal in common, and that is ensuring that our money will last throughout our retirement. And that's what brings us to the heart of the question that Leo brought up, the question that we will be addressing in this presentation. What happens when the paychecks stop? And what we're talking about here is how you replace the income that you earn during your working days with an income stream that's built to last through your retirement years. And I'll refer to this as your retirement income. So another way to ask what happens when the paycheck stops is to ask yourself, where will the money come from during my retirement? We're going to go over a few major themes today. The first is, what does your retirement look like for you? And this is really a discussion about the expenses of your retirement. Second, we'll go over where your retirement income will come from. This includes both outside sources as well as your portfolio. Next, once you've established a strategy for your income in retirement, what are some of the potential risks? There's no shortage of risks. Certainly, we're in the middle of a lot of volatility right now. As well, Terry brought up the risk of extra expenses when you have a change in health status. And so we will lastly talk about how you can address those risks. And specifically, we'll talk about the concept of incorporating the risks versus insuring against the risks. All right, just the word retirement can conjure very different images for different people. And for some of you, your thoughts might drift to somewhere sunny and warm or to traveling. And traveling could be in an RV around the country, or it might be a multiple country tour over in foreign countries, or a hiking trip down in South America. Maybe you're thinking more about spending time with your family or continuing your employment or volunteerism. Others might be nervous about retirement and not exactly sure what to expect. And I think one good way to start this conversation is just for you to envision yourself. Where would you like to be? What would you like to be doing? What's important to you, and who do you want to be sharing these visions with? I've been working with clients through the years, many married couples, and sometimes even just having that conversation with your partner or your close family is a real inflection point. Because if you've never shared that vision, then you might find out that you have separate visions. And sometimes even just talking about it opens up a process that allows you to access within yourself ideas that you may not have even thought of. I like to joke that a sunny window, a slice of pizza, and a baby grand piano would be more than enough for me in much of my retirement. But how you envision your retirement will likely change through the years, and I think it's a fun exercise and an important one to make sure that you are all on the same page and dealing with reality as we start to put together your vision. And once you've thought about these expectations, the next step, of course, is to outline what these expected expenses might look like. Since the amount you expect to spend each year is a key factor in the success of your strategy, it's important to develop a reasonable estimate for your spending. And we'll talk about this in some general terms. The most important thing I'd like you to take from this is to categorize your expenses into the necessary expenses like heat, water, food, your mortgage, rent, and then your discretionary expenses. And that might include travel and entertainment, for example. If you break out your expenses this way, you can better understand where you have flexibility, meaning where you can make adjustments from year to year, especially when you have a few unexpected surprises like a new roof that needs to be installed or perhaps a change in health. As well, you have to be thinking about taxes. As you begin withdrawing money, a portion of that money may be subject to taxes depending on the type of account it's in. Here at the University of Michigan, I'm sure you may have heard of the 403B plan, the 401A, the 457. Each of these has different tax strategies that should be employed, And when you develop a withdrawal strategy, we need to look at the tax treatment of your assets and work with a tax professional to make sure you keep your retirement from being too taxing, if you will. In any event, the only dollar you can spend in your retirement is an after-tax dollar. And so it's a good strategy to make sure you're including those taxes in your list of expenses. All right, let's talk about your sources of income. Once you understand how much you'll need, then we can start to talk about the question I mentioned earlier. Where will the income come from? And generally, we think of these sources in one of two categories. The outside sources of income, which I will get to in just a moment. And then the second is your savings and investment income. And let's walk through how you can begin estimating that income. We'll look at what we call your outside sources of income first. These make up the foundation of your retirement income. This could include Social Security, it could include pensions. If you are like some people, you might want to put some work in part-time, either for a cause that you believe in or in a vocation that you are passionate about. And we would include that as outside income. Pensions are quickly becoming a thing of the past for many workers. And sadly, what I've seen in my career is that really we are the first generation for whom our parents, we're making the transition from parents who had pensions to those of us who don't, which means there's a knowledge gap about how you make sure that you're able to take care of yourself in retirement when you don't have a pension available. If you do have a pension available, it would be considered an outside income source. As well, for the average 65-year-old today, Social Security is a crucial source of your retirement income and replaces about a third of your pre-retirement income in retirement. Certainly that's not enough to cover the whole kit and caboodle, but a third is no slouch. That estimate comes from the Social Security Administration's studies that were released about 6 years ago. And so the estimate for you may vary based on your pre-retirement salary, as well as your number of working years, and of course, your needs for income. And that's why your decision of when you plan to retire can be very important. The timing will impact how much income you'll need, as well as how much you'll receive from sources such as Social Security, which I will bring up right here. Let's talk about that timing with Social Security for a moment. Your benefit amount is partially based on something called your full retirement age, and that's the age at which you can receive 100% of your benefits. And I will start by right away telling you, I hate the term full retirement age because it implies that that is the maximum, 100%, of course, being the maximum of the benefits you can receive. That is actually not the case. I'll get to that in a moment. But if you look on this chart, you can begin taking benefits as early as age 62. Your benefits will be reduced by 25 to 30% if you take them before your full retirement age. On the other hand, you can increase your benefit by up to 32% if you delay claiming benefits past your full retirement age. And this goes all the way to age 70. In other words, you can receive your largest benefit by starting your benefits at age 70. And if it were up to me, I would have called that your full retirement age. There is some significance to that full retirement age as far as taxes are concerned. We'll leave that for another lecture. But for more information on this, I recommend looking at the Social Security Administration's website. If you go to www.ssa.gov, you can view your estimated benefit statement online. There's also a way that you can estimate your benefit using the online calculator. Now, it's not an easy decision to make, and your decision on when to take your benefit is a very personal one. That being said, it's important to make sure that you're making an informed decision because Social Security can be a very valuable benefit. It's a lifetime income stream that provides benefits for you and potentially your spouse if you're married, as well as increases for inflation. So we recommend you look at this decision through what we call a LENS. That's an acronym for LENS. And this refers to some key factors that you should consider as you make your decision. They include your life expectancy. They include your employment. They include your need, as well as your spousal benefit. There's a whole lecture we could do just on that alone, but I hope that this gets you at least to a pretty decent start. Now, we've discussed some of the outside sources of income. We need to figure out how much of a gap you will have between what you anticipate from those income sources as well as how much you'll need for your expenses. And the difference between those two numbers is what we call the income gap. This is what your savings and your investment income will need to cover. The question we now need to address is, how solid is your retirement income foundation? When we refer to your savings and investment income, we're talking about your 401ks, your 403bs, your 457s, your 401as, your IRAs, your savings, and other investments. And as your retirement gets closer, the purpose of these investments will change. Your portfolio no longer has to get you to retirement, it has to get you through retirement. Now, there's actually a psychological and an emotional process that comes with this as well. You've been spending decades, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 decades, swirling nuts into a corner and watching that pile of nuts get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, when you retire, something changes. You start taking nuts out of the corner and you're watching that pile get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that is a very emotional and sometimes difficult thing to have to confront. We have to know that you can make sure that this pile that you have saved for yourself can get you through your retirement, which is a little bit difficult to anticipate because none of us know, of course, when we will die. So that being said, there is both an art and a science to this. First question we have to ask is, can our portfolio support the gap that we need between our outside income sources and our expenses? And to help determine this, we recommend calculating 2 different additional measures. One is called your withdrawal rate, you can see that on the slide, as well as your reliance rate. Talk about what those 2 things are. Your withdrawal rate is the percentage of your portfolio that you're pulling each year. This is how many of the nuts, if you will, that you are taking from the corner. And this is one of the biggest numbers that affects how long your money will last and how to help ensure that your withdrawals and spending are sustainable through your retirement. There are 3 major items that influence how much that you can withdraw. The first one is your market performance. Second is the length of time you spend in retirement, which is a friendly way of saying how long until you die. And then the third is inflation, which is a hot button item right now. Let's start by talking about the reliance rate. Let's see here. Okay, that's a little bit of algebraic formula for you. But your reliance rate is essentially the percentage of your income that is coming from your portfolio. In other words, how much will you rely on your portfolio for your income during retirement? The higher your reliance rate, the more you'll be relying on your investments for your income needs, and therefore your strategy can be more sensitive to fluctuations in the market like the ones we are having right now. Unless you have a lot of flexibility with your expenses, you may want to consider ways to reduce your reliance rate, especially if it's more than 50%. This can be a little bit overwhelming, but keep in mind that I or your financial advisor can help. What you're essentially trying to determine is how much money you'll need, the sources of that income, as well as how long that money will last. With that in mind, one of the hot button topics that comes up from time to time is that of reverse mortgages. A reverse mortgage, first I want to disclaim that we are not experts in reverse mortgages, but I can give you at least enough information to be a little bit more informed. These products allow for homeowners age 62 or older to gain access to a percentage of their home through a non-recourse loan. And you can stay in the home and receive either a lump sum with a fixed interest rate, or perhaps you can get monthly income for the rest of your life, or even establish a line of credit or some combination of all these things. The beautiful thing is that it allows our seniors and our older investors to tap home equity in select situations to help fund some of their expenses. While this can be a reasonable thing to do, we don't offer reverse mortgages to clients, and we believe that they should only be used when addressing an income shortfall in retirement. We don't recommend that you use these products or tools in order to fund investments or non-essential expenditures. Let me tell you about some of the benefits. First, as I mentioned, it allows you to gain access to your home equity, even if you don't want to sell the home and you're worried that you will outlive your savings. The second is that you can get this money in either a lump sum or a monthly income. but there are some risks. One of those risks is that you can lose the home if you don't meet the terms of the reverse mortgage. As well, there is some concern that after you pass away, the home may be lost. Now, I use that word lost in quotation marks. The home won't be lost, but the bigger problem is that many times family members aren't aware of the conditions you need to satisfy in order to keep the home if that is their desire. And so if a family chooses to keep the home after death, it's best to make sure that the loan is paid off prior to moving out or prior to passing away. Because once the homeowner dies, the heirs can lose the control of the ability to keep that home. And so that's a situation we'd like to avoid. With that being said, let's continue by talking about some of these other risks to your retirement income. As I mentioned, everyone has individual retirement goals, but we all share one common goal, which is making sure the money lasts as long as we need it. There are a few different ways to address risks, and here we list them as incorporating risks versus insuring against risks. When we talk about incorporating a risk, we're referring to including that cost of the risk in your expenses. Essentially, you're budgeting for it if it were to happen. And when I'm talking about insuring against a risk, I'm referring to using a financial product or a solution to protect yourself against the cost if that risk were to materialize. The question for incorporate versus insure is truly a personal one. Do you want to self-insure against the risk by making sure you have enough money in your account to pay for it? Or do you want to offload some of this risk to an insurance company? There's no right answer, but the key is to address the risk as part of your strategy. And I want to go through a handful of these risks as well as some strategies for how to think about them. The first risk is outliving your retirement savings. How long is retirement? The problem, no one knows for sure, but here are some facts to help you build a framework. The first is that according to recent mortality tables within the last 5 or 6 years, there is a 60% chance that 1 out of 2 65-year-old spouses will reach age 90. And if a 65-year-old couple were to retire today, that could mean as much as 20 to 30 years or more in retirement. So it comes back to that common goal, ensuring your money lasts throughout your retirement, and considering that your retirement could be 25 years or longer, there are other risks that you need to keep in mind, which we'll address in just a moment. Now, if you're going to live 20 to 30 years in retirement, I think it's reasonable to say that you will see your share of market ups and downs. And so how do you weather this storm? Let's talk about how to incorporate this risk into your strategy, as well as ways to insure against it. Reducing your withdrawal rate is one way to incorporate this risk. That's a very friendly way of saying spend a little less money. I recognize that. But as a rule of thumb, a modest withdrawal rate, approximately 4% per year initially for somebody at age 65, is a key part of the successful retirement strategy, because what it does is it allows for the increase of cost of living and inflationary expenses over time. If based on your income needs, your withdrawal rate seems too high, you might need to consider other options, such as either working longer or perhaps spending less. Now, your asset allocation strategy here is critical, because the table on this chart assumes that you have a diversified portfolio of both stocks and bonds, 50% stocks and 50% bonds, as well as a life expectancy to age 90. Diversification is not going to guarantee a profit or protect against a loss, but I do see an error that many investors make, which is that they're either too aggressive in stocks and that market volatility creates all sorts of disruption through their retirement, or they're overly conservative and they're not earning enough interest for their portfolios to sustain. In our view, being too aggressive or too conservative can be risky when determining how much you can withdraw. A couple other items to keep in mind. Age plays a role. The younger you are, the lower your withdrawal rate should be. We're going to talk about that in a moment when we talk about market decline. You should allow your expenses to have some flexibility, and you need to make sure that your Reliance Rate and your risk tolerance influence your withdrawal rate. For example, if you are very risk averse, that's okay, but it also means that you might have to withdraw less money from your portfolio to make up for the lower returns. And then if appropriate, you should consider your desire to leave a legacy I have some clients who want to make sure the next generations receive something from their efforts, and I have others that would like to bounce their final check as they pass away, and everything in between. But we should make sure to consider that when you're putting together your plan. Now, if you prefer to insure against the risk of outliving your savings, consider ways to stabilize your retirement income foundation. And this includes accounting for your lifetime income sources, income that is unaffected by market fluctuations, which you can't outlive. For example, we talked about the importance of Social Security and thinking about your strategy to take full advantage of this important benefit. And of course, there are others. Now let's talk about one of our hot button items right now, and that is market declines. Though market declines can and will occur during your retirement, the timing of a downturn is actually an unexpected risk. In other words, it's not just how the investments perform over time, it also may have to do with the risk that you retire during a downturn in the market like the one that we're having right now. And this could directly impact the value of your investments as well as the income they can provide during your retirement. We see this potential impact when we look at something called sequence of returns risk. It's an illustration of the possibility of retiring at a misopportune time. And this is important because market performance in the early years of your retirement is a crucial driver to determine how long your retirement income will last. For example, if markets are negative early in your retirement years, it can have a significant impact on your retirement portfolio for years to come, and even increase the chance that you might run out of money, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. If you look at this chart, these are two hypothetical scenarios over an 8-year period where both investors start with $500,000 and they both average 6% per year. Now, we also presume that withdrawals are increasing to keep up with inflation, but you'll see that the order of returns are reversed between the investors. And what's starkly different here is the ending portfolio value. So whether you're withdrawing at 4% or at 6%, scenario 2 results in a lower portfolio value. And so the lesson to learn from here is do not count on average returns. No one knows when the markets will have good or bad years, and the sequence of those returns can have impact. And so if you don't know the weather, make sure that you pack an umbrella is a good way to think about this. You have to expect stormy weather, and although they can be emotionally stressful, if you have incorporated that stormy weather into the plan, your long-term outcome is going to be just fine. All right, and that continuing along that line, a few other ways to incorporate market declines into your strategy. First, have a year's worth of your income needs in cash. That doesn't necessarily mean a year's worth of expenses, but if you're spending $60,000 per year and you've got $25,000 per year coming in Social Security, then I'd say having the balance of that $35,000 in cash available at all times is a good buffer to make sure that you're covered in case of some market declines, as well as having a CD ladder. And CD rates will start to get better this year. We project that lasts over the next 3 years or so to add on to your emergency savings cash. Then lastly, as a stopgap measure, be a little bit flexible with your spending. If inflation is not happening or if your expenses aren't rising, then there's no need for you to increase how much you're taking from your portfolio. You may need to adjust if markets underperform. So have some flexibility with that. Now, from an insurer perspective, consider your lifetime sources of income. These are income sources that are unaffected by market fluctuations that you can't outlive. For example, we talked about Social Security and thinking about your strategy to take full advantage of that benefit. As well, certain investments, and I hate to say this because I know that there are a lot of emotions that are attached to it, and there's a lot of bad versions of this, but an annuity may be suitable and can offer insured payments for life. To get you started, a financial advisor can walk you through an established process to build a personalized strategy tailored to what you're needing on here. All right, 2 more risks and we're going to wrap it up. Inflation, again, another hot button item. Inflation has been relatively low for most of the last 10 years. Of course, within the last year, the last 6 months specifically, the effects have been very remarkable. We do believe that this is a relatively short-term burst of inflation. Short-term could be 1 year, it could be 4 years. We don't believe the inflationary pressures that we're experiencing are going to last for the next 20 to 30 years. That being said, even with average inflation, just look at the historical cost of a few goods and services that many of us have purchased during our lifetime. And you can see from this chart that over a 25-year period, with even average inflation, you will see an increase in the cost of many of your day-to-day items. So let's talk about some ways to incorporate this risk into your strategy, as well as some ways to insure against it. Incorporate against the risk, well, one is you can spend a little bit less money in order to make sure you're incorporating a higher inflation rate. But the second is to include some investments with the potential for rising income. I don't want to get too far into specific investments right now, but I know many of us are hearing about the rising costs of gas and fuel, which are at the highest points that we've seen in our history. Well, also, that being said, the energy sector of our investments is the top performing sector for the year, with the average stock being up 26% over the last 2 years. So if you're not happy with the price of gas, certainly owning the gas company is a way to hedge against that effect. If you're not happy with the cost of chocolate, certainly owning the chocolate company is a way to hedge against that. Because of inflation, we think that it's important to have at least some exposure to the equity markets within the tolerance of what you can accept. Now, as far as insuring, it can be a little bit more challenging. Social Security does currently provide a cost of living adjustment. So once again, maximizing your benefit can help with inflation as well. All the more reason to make sure that you're making a wise decision with this. As well, from an insurance perspective, there are some investment options that can provide annual cost of living adjustments that help offset inflation, including Treasury inflated protected securities. I don't want to get too far into specifics. If you have other questions on this, please consult a financial advisor. Lastly, let's talk about the risk of healthcare and long-term care. Terry brought this up as well. Your plan for the expected should incorporate some of the typical healthcare costs, including Medicare and healthcare premiums. When we're talking about healthcare, there are basically two components to consider. One is traditional medical costs, and the second is long-term medical care. When we're talking about traditional medical costs, these would be your medical needs like prescription drugs, doctor visits, outpatient visits, hospital visits, and dental expenses. Long-term medical care has traditionally implied nursing home, but as Terry mentioned, also includes assisted living and home health care and adult daycare, with costs varying. Now, for your traditional medical costs, budgeting about $5,500 per year per person is enough to cover the things that Medicare won't, such as your premiums, your deductibles, and your co-insurance, dental, hearing, eye exam. Of course, your mileage may vary here. This is an estimate. For long-term care, the amount you budget really depends on how you plan on covering these expenses. Terry mentioned Medicare will cover only short-term stays for up to 100 days and only a portion and only under certain conditions, whereas the cost of a private room in a nursing home can exceed $100,000 per year. In fact, here's a quick study brought to us by Lincoln Financial that shows home care at about $26 per hour, whereas assisted living facilities in the Southeast Michigan area are running around $6,000 per month for a one-bedroom. And then, of course, skilled nursing care, which comes out in Southeast Michigan to about $300 per day, or $9,000 to $10,000 per month. Can you afford it? Well, let's talk about some ways to incorporate this risk into your strategy, as well as ways to insure against it. As far as incorporating the risk, it comes down to the choice of saving for it by including these costs in your retirement budget. That's just the reality. We don't know when they're going to come or if they're going to come, but having money set aside is certainly an option. If you prefer to insure against the risk, you should consider some of the long-term care insurances, especially some of the newer ones. Many of the new policies now have a provision that states if you pass away without ever needing to use your benefits, the insurance companies will refund your premiums to your heirs. That's something that doesn't exist with any other kind of insurance I know of. If I, die without ever getting into a car accident, I know that Allstate is not going to return my lifetime's worth of car premiums. If you die without your home coming on fire, I don't know that State Farm is going to refund to you all of your premiums paid to date. But with the new policies, this is certainly worth considering, specifically if you're between age 50 and 60, because it's still relatively inexpensive. Now, let's wrap it up. I often share this illustration of the process I use with my clients when we're looking at financial goals. I think it'll be helpful to keep in mind that this is a continuum, but it's common sense and it can really help forge the basis for a strategy you can use to pursue your financial goals. And that's first starting by taking a hard look at where you are in the current moment, setting clear and measurable goals for where you're trying to go, checking the feasibility of those to see if they're realistic, working with a financial advisor, or if you would like to do it yourself, that's possible, to determine the tools and strategies and options to help you reach your goal. But this is the most important. This is not something that you can set and forget. You want to make sure that you are revisiting this to make sure that your portfolio and strategy are in alignment with your tolerance for risk, with your life as your life changes, with the world as the world changes, and so on and so on. So that wraps up my presentation for today. Again, thank you for the time. If you would like to reach me, I'm over on Carpenter Road on Ann Arbor's east side. Here's my contact information. And with that, I will turn it back to Leo, our moderator. Thank you again.
Jerry, thank you so much for walking us through the complexities of the financial side of today's topic. Tara, if you can come back online, we do have some questions queued up. A common question and with a good news answer is a number of people have asked if they can avail themselves of the slides you guys have provided today. And I think the answer to that is yes, and they'll get that in the form of a video of today's events. And that's much appreciated and much asked for. With that, let's move into some of the questions that have come forward, and you can still put questions in, although we are a bit limited on time. Question comes in, what happens if you put your kids as a recipient of an IRA instead of a spouse, or as a secondary recipient after the spouse? Jerry, maybe you can comment on that first.
Of course, first is you can certainly put anybody as a recipient of your IRA instead of the spouse. I'm going to have to defer to legal counsel on this, but in some states, it's possible that your spouse may need to sign off on it. That's not the case here in Michigan. But if you list somebody that's not your spouse as the recipient of your IRA or life insurance contract, quite simply, they receive the assets when you pass away. Now, if you list them as secondary recipients after the spouse, you want to make sure you understand exactly what's going to happen here. If you pass away and you list your spouse as the primary beneficiary, it will go to him or her. Once he or she receives those funds, your secondary recipients are no longer in force. That spouse can name new beneficiaries based on his or her preferences a year from now or 10 years from now. So know that the secondary recipients only have relevance if you and your spouse pass away at the same time. I defer to Terry. Is there anything that I'm missing here on that?
No, I think that's correct. I mean, the other issue that's corollary with this is what are the tax implications? And if a spouse is the recipient of an IRA, they can stretch it out over their life expectancy, a rollover. But if it's other than a spouse and someone is at the age of majority, 18, and they are not considered special needs person with a significant disability, there's what's called the Secure Act, which requires them to withdraw that over the maximum of a 10-year period and pay the taxes accordingly. So there are tax implications on who you put on as a beneficiary. And so you want to make sure you get good advice as to what's right for your situation.
Good. Thanks to both of you for commenting on that. Let's move on. An audience member asks, can one access Medicaid for long-term care only after they run out of all their personal assets? Terry, can you comment on that?
Yeah, not necessarily. There are things that can be done to assist individuals in qualifying without having to do what we refer to as a spend down. So the state says, you know, you're allowed to have $2,000, a home and a car and a simple burial policy if you're single, and if you're with a spouse, they can keep up to half of the assets to a maximum of about $130,000. There are legitimate, ethical, legal things that can be done where you can, for the at-home spouse or others, keep more assets, but it takes planning. And so what I always tell people is, if you're in a situation, either believing that you need to go to a skilled nursing facility or are already in one, that you ought to talk to an elder law attorney to see if there's any ways that you can correctly and properly protect some of the additional assets above those spend down limits.
Good. Thanks for that. We'll again keep moving on here. Here's someone asked, if they have assets in multiple states, do they need trust and wills in those multiple states? Terry, maybe you can comment on that as well.
Yep. So if I have a will-based plan and I have real estate in more than one state, there has to be a probate upon my death in each state where there are real estate assets. If the other assets I have are bank accounts, typically the probate in the state that you are domiciled in is the only one that's necessary. If I have a trust-based plan where I have a trust to handle my affairs after my death, and I have put my properties in it, even if it's real estate from multiple states, it avoids a probate in every state, and you only need one will or one trust. In either case, it's just a matter of, does that will have to work in more than one state, or does that trust work in more than one state?
Good, thank you. Jerry, a question maybe you can answer. Something we see in the media all too often perhaps is it true that Social Security funds will run out in a year like 2034? I think we see this periodically, and that date is always just over the horizon somewhere. Can you comment on that, please, Jerry?
Of course, I'd be happy to. And it's an important question here. And the words you're using here, you have to be very careful with. Normally, when this news comes out, you will hear that Social Security will be unable to meet its obligation in the year 2034. That is not the same thing as saying Social Security will run out of money. Okay. For example, if you have a mortgage payment that is $1,500 per month, and you're only able to pay $1,425 per month, technically you are in default and you are risking the possibility that you may have your home foreclosed. But certainly the bank is going to appreciate getting $1,425 per month as opposed to getting $0 per month. And so I cannot speculate on how this problem will be solved, but we can start by saying it's not so much that Social Security is going to run out. It's that they're not going to be able to meet their obligation. And there are three ways that they can go about fixing this. The first is they can simply raise the amount of Social Security income that's raised through taxes. The second thing that they can do is they can reduce the amount that people are going to receive. And third is they can delay the onset of the receipt of those funds. Which of those three things are going to happen, or what combination of those three things are going to happen, we don't know. And unfortunately, this is not an arithmetic problem. The arithmetic is actually pretty simple. It's political. You have everybody sitting at a table with their arms crossed saying, well, I'm not going to budge. The answer is at some point they will have to budge, and how we figure this out, I'm not quite sure. Now, what can you do about it? I would say expect taxes to go up. And although that doesn't, and that's not the news that you want to hear, of course, I would rather, if we are going to have to address that risk, if you presume that taxes are going to go up, there are some things that you can do today to help hedge against that. Converting your IRA to a Roth is something that should at least be explored. The second is that if you are still in the working age, consider the real possibility that your Social Security benefits may be delayed out a few years compared to where you were hoping or expecting. And then third is perhaps contributing your funds into Roth 401as and 401ks to hedge you against increased tax increases. That being said, the ability for Social Security to make its payments is not far. Even in the city of Detroit, where my father was a pensioner, even after the bankruptcy, he's receiving 97% of the amount that he was promised. So I understand that nobody likes when promises are broken, and I don't know how Social Security will be resolved, but we do know that the numbers are close enough that they will not have a terrible impact as long as we work to find a solution. Long answer, but it's a complicated question.
Jerry, thank you very much. Here's one on gift tax. And Terry, this might tie to one of your slides. Someone says, I thought gift tax was for amounts in the millions, and the 15,000 annual limit just means you have to file a form with the IRS so they can track your cumulative gifting over a lifetime. And then kind of secondarily, does a ladybird deed relieve the heir of that tax liability? A bit of a more complicated question. Can you
Yeah, well, let's start with the gift tax because there are really separate issues here. In terms of the gift tax, the way that works is you can give the 15,000 each year to anybody, and there's no reporting obligation whatsoever. If you give above that amount, then there is a reporting obligation with the IRS. It's a Form 709, in case you want to know, a gift tax return. And so long as you haven't given too much over your lifetime, there is not a tax due. There's a reporting requirement on your annual tax return. And you can give during your life under the current tax scheme $11.7 million between during your life and after death, with the limit being 15,000 a year before you're reporting that. So oftentimes there's not a tax, there's a reporting requirement there for the gift. But unfortunately, we run into situations where a lot of people will do gifting beyond that and not report it, and then it becomes a tax. It's not a reporting issue if you don't file that on an annual basis. A ladybird deed is slang for a way of me conveying my real estate to somebody after my death. So I would title my property that says, I'm going to keep it to Terry Bertram for my life, and after my death, it goes to whoever. And that's where I'm reserving for myself a life estate. Is that a way of avoiding capital gains tax or gift tax during life? And the answer is yes. That is also a way of conveying property because you're keeping it during your life and you have full authority to sell it, remortgage it, do whatever you want. And you're saying, whatever, if there's something left at my death, here's who gets it. So you're not conveying it until after death. And that is a way of avoiding these different tax issues.
Terry, just a quick follow-up. So on the 15,000 annual, that's not a tax event for the giver or the recipient. Is that a true statement?
That is a true statement. Now, of course, if I'm the recipient of that 15,000 and I invested in something and it earns money, so that 15,000, if annually it earns $1,000, I got to pay taxes on that $1,000 of earnings after I get it, but I don't have to pay any tax on receiving that 15,000.
All right, and one more follow-up just came in on this gifting topic. Is the 15,000 per recipient or per gift giver?
It's per gift giver. So mom and dad could each give $15,000 to son for a total of $30,000 that could be received by the son.
But if they had 3 daughters, they could give to those folks as well, eh?
Of course they could. Absolutely.
For clarity, right? So it's
Yeah.
15 per giver spread across, I think, any number of recipients. Eh?
Right. So in your scenario, there are 3 children. Each mom and dad could each give 15, 15, and 15. So a total of, in that scenario, $90,000, and it would not be subject to any gift tax or reporting.
Good. Thanks for the clarification. Another question. If you are sued, can they come after your IRA? Wow, there's a question. Can either of you comment on that, please? Jerry?
Well, certainly, any financial asset that is registered in your name is going to be part of that lawsuit. IRAs offer some protection depending on the source of those funds, but if it's in your name, it's in your name. Terry, and maybe I can defer to you on this. I know that IRAs have a different level of protection than 401ks and other deferred compensation accounts. Any comment in that regard?
Yeah, so it is my understanding, I don't practice in the bankruptcy area, but it's my understanding under the bankruptcy statute, your IRA is not something that can be taken. But of course, a lawsuit is not a bankruptcy. It's someone suing you for money, and so it is a potential asset. But in terms of the other part of the law, there was a case that recently went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and where someone was trying to say they have an inherited IRA, and that should be asset protected. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, it is not. So while yours can be protected in terms of bankruptcy, and it may be shielded as far as the court's looking at it from an asset protection to some extent if you're being sued, it certainly has none of those protections once it's inherited. And often people will have a specific type of retirement trust that does protect it from an asset protection standpoint. So when it is inherited, because it wouldn't be otherwise.
Good, thanks. Here's a question that may not be all that rare. It says, I am single with no children, and most of my friends are my age or older. I'm 75. Is there an organization that can provide trustworthy POA, power of attorney, I assume, for a fee? I don't need help so much with drawing up the paperwork, rather finding a person who can fill these roles and backups as well. Thanks. Is there such a service of any kind for fee?
The answer is yes, there is. I mean, the most obvious is there's institutional organizations as far as trust departments in banks and what have you who provide that, but also financial service companies, even the Edward Jones the Fidelities and other companies will provide that service at that level. And then at the professional level, there are social workers, there's elder care coordinators, some attorneys, some accountants who also provide that service. So yeah, it can be hard, but there are options for people when they don't have a family or loved ones that or friends that they feel are trustworthy in wanting to and needing that service available to them.
Good. Thank you for that information. As the clock winds down, Jerry, here's a financial related comment. Any recommendations on how and where to buy long-term care insurance? Any good one you can recommend? And let me combine that. Would you advise purchase of anything but a fixed type of annuity in terms of investment?
Sure, that's a good question. I'll obviously start with an embedded bias here. We are both servicing agents as insurance agents for multiple carriers for long-term care companies as well as annuity companies. Edward Jones does not offer its own products. We are able to provide assistance with matching you up to annuity company or long-term care insurance as you see fit. Of course, you have other options. Terry brought up Fidelity. And here in Ann Arbor, there are no shortage of competitors, but make sure that you're working with somebody who's knowledgeable. As well, I do think it's better to work with an institution that represents and can shop from multiple carriers rather than working with one where they are beholden to their own company. So that's the first thing, especially because each of these different carriers offers different advantages and disadvantages depending on both your health, your age, and your objectives with the policy. Now, as far as annuities, out of the the large sum that we manage out of this branch, I would say it's a very small percentage of our portfolio that we have with annuities, because many of them are expensive and complicated. That being said, there are times where a variable annuity may be the best match for what you're trying to accomplish. So with your question, would I ever recommend something other than a fixed annuity? The answer is yes, but only when appropriate and very intentionally. I hope that answers your question.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today and providing excellent information from different perspectives on something we all face. If you was pointed out, we all need to be thinking in these terms. Thanks to you both. Thanks to our audience for joining us today. And again, as mentioned, there'll be a new topic on this same theme next Friday at the same time. Thanks to you all.